Over the past 10 or 12 years, I've purchased a lot of tools. Some I use every day, others not nearly so much. In this video, I'm going to go through the tools, separate the all-stars from the dogs, and maybe save you some money along the way. What do you say we get the cabinet out of the way? Fine Woodworking issue number 237, that's where the plans are from. Great build, fun build, lots of room for customization, and enough room for pretty much anyone's tool collection. Now I'm really glad I went with a wall-mounted version. Floor standing cabinets. The thought of bending over constantly, digging through tills to get the tools I need just didn't sound appealing to me. And also in my small shop, I didn't want to give up that valuable real estate on the floor for a tool cabinet when I could put things up on the wall. Now before we dig in any further, let me just get this out of the way. Some of these tools don't see a lot of use anymore because as I got more power tools, some of these have been relegated to just looking pretty on a shelf. Like when I got my jointer, planer, bandsaw, and domino, that really changed my workflow in the shop. Doesn't make the tools that I don't use anymore bad tools. It's just I found different ways to do things that I enjoy more. Let's start with the left side of the cabinet and go over the saws. When I first started, I started with Lie-Nielsen dovetail, crosscut, and tenon saws. Obviously they're the Western variety. They cut with the push stroke, and I used these for the first few years until I was introduced to Japanese saws, namely the Dozuki and the Ryoba saw. These are really the ones I reach for every day now. They come razor sharp right out of the box. When they get dull, you can just replace the blade. You don't have to buy an entirely brand new saw. They cut with the pull stroke, which to me feels a little bit more natural. I feel like I have a little bit more control, and they leave a razor thin curve, which I really like. So as nice as those Lie-Nielsen saws are, if I were to get rid of them, I don't think it would affect my capabilities in the shop at all. In fact, my advice for most people would be like, spend 120 bucks, get a couple of good Japanese saws, and I think you'll be surprised how far it takes you. Now the next saw is this fret saw by New Concepts. I love cutting dovetails, and to remove the waste between pins and tails, for me this saw is essential. On thicker materials and harder materials like white oak, I'll reach for my generic coping saw, but any other time I can, I'll reach for this one first. It's very rigid, very lightweight, easy to maneuver. It's a really beautiful tool that's really well thought out. And the last hand saw that I use on a regular basis is this Veritas flush cutting saw. A little pricey at $40, but I like it a lot more than this real floppy version that it replaced. This one, it always felt like the blade was on the verge of kinking. Wasn't a fan of it. So while the blade, yes, it's not as flexible as the other one, it's flexible enough. Does a tremendous job. Now on these two small shelves, I have a Veritas cabinet scraper. Great tool for working on large flat surfaces prior to sanding. And the great thing about it, whether you're going with the grain or against the grain, much like a card scraper, it produces very little tear out and does a really good job of cleaning up areas really quickly. Below that, I have a Veritas edger jointer, and this basically just holds a file at 45 or 90 degrees, and I just use it to prep my card scrapers prior to working on them further. All right, inside this door is another door which opens up to reveal the carving tools. These I've slowly accumulated over the years. I like to buy them as needed, sort of like with router bits. I would never buy a starter set, and I would recommend to people, don't do that because you're gonna be stuck with a bunch that you're never gonna use. Plus they're probably gonna be of questionable quality. There's so many different sweeps and sizes, so don't get overwhelmed. Buy them as you need them. That way you're not stuck with a bunch that will never see the light of day. Okay, moving on to the other door. This face is dominated by squares and card scrapers. 6-inch and 12-inch combination squares. I went with Starrett. Very worthwhile investment. You're going to be reaching for them constantly. I have a cheap square here, which I use mostly for layout of rough lumber, and I have a small engineer square, which I use mostly for machine setup. Then up here, I have a dozen or so card scrapers. They're really one of the few bargains in this hobby. For a couple of bucks, you get a tool that's great at cleaning up tear out, cleaning up glue, fairing curves. So I have a bunch in different shapes and sizes and gauges. They're really one of the most simple tools, but in my opinion, one of the most valuable. Then on this shelf I have a couple of tools which I would classify as pseudo gimmicky, but they work really well, so I'm glad to have them around. One is the Bridge City Kerf Maker, which is really great for nailing the sizes of tenons when you're doing mortise and tenon joinery. And next to that I have an AccuBurr burnishing rod. Now, I know everybody says everything is a game changer when it comes to tools, but this actually kind of is one. It's such a simple device. It just takes the guesswork out of getting the angle right when you're making the burr on your card scrapers. Very simple tool. Surprised that no one thought of it earlier, but I'm glad they did. Now, behind this panel, we have some of my favorite tools in the shop, my chisels. I went with Lie-Nielsen for all of them. With the bench chisels, I go from 1/8 of an inch all the way up to 1 inch. I like having a wide variety of sizes. Just starting out, you can do 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4, then add more sizes as you see fit. I like having the wide variety because I always seem to have the right size for just the right job. Below the bench chisels, I have my fishtail chisel, which I'm in love with. I cut a lot of half-blind dovetails, and I use those to clean out the corners. You could use a left and a right skew chisel, but why have two chisels when one fishtail chisel can easily do the job of both? Next to that, I have a couple of mortising chisels. Before I got the Domino, I used to cut a lot of mortises by hand or use the router. And ever since I got the Domino, these kind of got put to the wayside. They'll come in handy a few times a year when I'm doing through mortise and tenons, but that's pretty much it. So a couple of times a year, they get taken out of the cabinet. Next to that, we have a corner chisel. Terrific waste of money. Squaring up a mortise is not a difficult task with regular bench chisels. Certainly doesn't justify spending money on a specialized tool to do it, especially when that's such a pain in the neck to sharpen. So completely unnecessary, and definitely a purchase I kind of regret. Next to that, we have another burnishing rod, which I use to draw out the metal of the card scrapers, something the AccuBurr is too small to really do. Next to that, a couple of specialty screwdrivers, one to adjust the frog of the hand planes, and one to take care of the chip breaker. As you can guess, nice to have, not essential. And the last things in the side of the cabinet, we have some drill bits for my hand drill. And next to that, I have a Lie-Nielsen dowel plate. If I were to rebuy this, I would actually get the DFM Tools version, which has about twice the number of holes. So it gives you more options for sizes. And when you're going from hole to hole, it's a little bit easier because there's less material to remove as you're sizing up your dowels. Okay, doors out of the way. Let's hit the center of the cabinet. We got a couple of blue spruce marking knives and an awl. Great substitute for that would be the Veritas striking knife, a fraction of the price, and it's going to do the job just as well. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a curly maple handle, or just a sucker because they got my money. Then we have some spoke shaves. I have a flat bottom, a curved bottom spoke shave, which is great for fairing the inside of curves, and I have a concave spoke shave. Not essential, but it came in really handy for my walnut bench build. Video available. I use that on the long round stretchers, work perfectly for shaping them. Moving right along, we have another kind of dumb purchase. That is the Bridge City Tools palm brace. Never gets used. I thought it would be fun to play around with, but it really doesn't help you get any work done. Basically a shiny toy. I'll probably end up selling that sooner rather than later. I then have a Lie-Nielsen peen hammer. I use that for plane adjustments, for tapping in brad nails, and also for helping with some glue ups, smaller scale projects. Comes in very handy. Then we have a couple of calipers. I started with the Starrett dial caliper. Works great, super accurate, but then a digital caliper came into my life and stole my heart. I love using it, much easier to read, and being able to switch instantly from imperial to metric comes in really handy, especially when you're working with real funky numbers. Like if I'm trying to find the center of a board, finding the middle of 32.4 millimeters is a lot easier than trying to divide some funky fraction in half. So I use those actually a lot more than the very expensive Starrett calipers. In fact, I think the digital caliper is about 1/3 of the price of the Starrett. And then we have a couple of pairs of dividers. This is, I believe, a 4-inch and a 6-inch. They come in handy for lots of things, but primarily I use them for laying out dovetails. And now for the really fun stuff, the hand planes. I love using hand planes in my work. Some I use constantly throughout a job. Others I haven't touched in months just because of the way I work now. So let's go through them. All right, first up, the Lee Nielsen number 62, also known as the low angle jack. You need a jack plane. I love the low angle jack because by changing the micro bevel of the iron, you could change your angle of attack without having to swap out the frog. Makes things a lot easier. If you do want to go the conventional route, I would suggest the number 5.5. That's a great plane. I use it to knock off high points on a board before I send it through the jointer. I do it to flatten smaller boards. I'll use it on my shooting board. It really is a tool you're going to reach for constantly, and I think you can't go wrong making it one of your first hand tool purchases. Next to the jack plane, probably my favorite hand tool in the shop. This is my Lee Nielsen number 4 bronze smoother. I went with the bronze version. It's a little bit heavier than the cast iron version. Gives you a little bit more mass to help you push through the cut. This pretty much touches every piece that goes through my shop. After this, I might go direct to finish, or at the very least, it's really going to reduce the amount of sanding I have to do. Along with the jack plane, I really think owning a number 4 or a number 4.5, which is slightly bigger, would benefit pretty much every woodworker out there. And the third plane that I think every woodworker should have is a good quality block plane. This is a Lee Nielsen low angle block. When I'm working on a project, this is pretty much used every single day. Breaking edges, chamfering, fitting drawers, you're going to be reaching for it constantly. I can't go wrong with this guy. Then we have another block plane. This is the Lee Nielsen rabbiting block plane where the blade goes to either edge and it has a pair of nickers on either side to score the wood before the blade gets to it to prevent tear out. If you have a shoulder plane, that could do quite a few of the things that this can do. So nice to have, but not super essential. Then we have a couple of joinery planes. This is the large and the small router plane by Lee Nielsen. I love these two, wouldn't want to be without them. You want to make the bottom of a dado or a groove perfectly flat, reach for this guy. You want to trim the thickness of a tenon, or my favorite thing to do with them is fitting hinges. So much more relaxing to use than a powered router. And also, unlike a powered router, things won't go sideways so quickly. Two great tools, absolutely love them. I would suggest starting with the larger one, and then as budget permits, throw the smaller one into the mix. Okay, a couple of more joinery planes. The large and small shoulder planes by Lee Nielsen. To be honest, I kind of wish I just had the medium. The large is fairly clunky to use and the small just doesn't get a lot of work done. I think the medium might hit that sweet spot for me, so I think I'm going to investigate that more in the future. Now, I don't reach for the shoulder planes that often, but they are nice to have around. Again, they duplicate a lot of the tasks that a rabbiting block plane can do. So this is something you might want to investigate, try out, and see which one you really prefer in your shop. Then we have a pair of very specialized hand tools. These are side rabbiting planes. There's a left and a right, so you could best match the grain direction of the wall that you're trying to trim, whether it be in a groove, a dado, or a rabbet. To be honest, I should have left these in the shopping cart. They get hardly any use at all. So over the years, I'm sure there was a handful of times where this was the right tool for the job. But to be honest, I'm sure I could have found a workaround with another tool, save myself some space and some money. So yeah, that one was a bit of a misstep. It just doesn't see much action. Speaking of not getting any action, let me tell you about my high school years. Just kidding. Let me tell you about my scrub plane. So the scrub plane has a really narrow sole, wide open mouth, and a very heavily cambered blade. This is going to hog off a lot of material really quickly. Before I got a jointer and a planer, this actually saw some use, but once I got those two tools, this was pretty much rendered obsolete. I don't use this at all. Its main job right now is to keep this area of the cabinet free of dust. We now have a third block plane. This is the Lee Nielsen 102. A lot of people will refer to it as an apron plane. Very tight mouth, nice for detail work. But to be honest, everything I could do with this, I could do with my Lee Nielsen low angle block plane. So many people swear by this one plane, but for me, So yeah, if I were to do it all over again, this one might get a pass. Then we have a plane you really don't hear much about. This is a Lee Nielsen edge plane. Think of it almost like a mini jointer. It has a built-in 90-degree fence. This is for trimming the edges of boards perfectly perpendicular to the face. It comes in more handy than you would think, but I would definitely put this in the nice to have but not essential category. All right, we're in the home stretch, and this is the area of the cabinet where money and tools go to die. These are some big ticket items that I really thought I needed at the time, and it turns out I was mistaken. Let's dive in. All right, first up is my most expensive hand tool. This is a Lee Nielsen number 7 jointer plane. Once I got a jointer and a planer, I really had no need for this. I'll use this rarely on really long boards to work on an edge prior to a glue up, but other than that, it really stays put. Now, if you're a hand tool only woodworker, a tool like that would be a godsend. But when you have a pretty decent complement of power tools and hand tools, I just don't feel the need to reach for it, which is a shame because it's such a cool looking tool. And now the last 2 planes, a skew rabbet plane and a plow plane, and a ton of blades that are as sharp as the day I got them. Why? You know, I've never used them. Let's take a closer look. Let's talk about the skew rabbet plane first. It has a depth stop. It has a movable fence to set the width of the rabbet, and the blade is set skewed, thus the name. That makes for a cleaner cut. And then once you have everything set, you just get to work. It's funny, as soon as you start using it, you realize this is a lot of fun to use. Maybe a New Year's resolution for me, use your skew rabbet plane. The reason I don't is because when I'm making a project, I want to get it done. And the thought of slowing down so much to do something like a rabbet is a bit of a turnoff for me, but maybe I should rethink that. All right, let's do the plow plane now. Then we have the plow plane. The plow plane really excels at making grooves. You can also get different shape cutters to make small hollows and rounds for beading work, but making grooves is really where this thing is at. Right now I have a 1/4 inch cutter inserted. I have the width set to give us a groove about 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom of the side of this piece. So let's get to work. So obviously with a dado set or a router bit, you'd make this same groove in a few seconds as opposed to a few minutes. But it is actually kind of fun to use, and I may have just inspired myself to give this a little bit more love in my shop. All right, let's wrap things up. All right, quickly, what's behind the doors? Here I have a few Incra layout tools, which I use pretty frequently. I have a round mallet that I use for carving, and a small compact brass mallet, which I'll use for detail work. In this wallet, I have a few extra blades for the bevel up jack, a couple of different micro bevels, and one is a toothing blade. I believe when I bought it, it came in a package deal. I don't think I've ever used a toothing blade. Then on this side of the cabinet, here are a few more rulers. This one is particularly helpful. This is a center finding ruler and a 6-inch scale, which I use all the time. This guy, not so much. And then I have an adze, which I've used a few times. I had a cherry tree fall down in the backyard, cut some logs, and I made a few David Fisher style bowls. The adze came in very useful for that, and they came out really nice. The drawers, nothing too special going on here. I have extra blades for the fret saw, sanding blocks to keep the hand planes looking good, getting rid of any surface rust. In this drawer, I have some blades for carving, chip carving, a spoon carving knife. In this drawer, some extra spline material. And in this drawer, my blocks for working on Kumiko. And out of everything, the tools, the cabinet, my absolute favorite part of this setup, the bottom of this drawer. My kids were 4 years old. They were learning how to write their names. So I said, here, write it on the bottom of this drawer. September 21st, 2015. They would have been 4. I miss those guys. They're in prison now. 7th grade. Honor roll. And that's a wrap. Before we go, I thought it'd be a little fun and a lot painful to pull out all the tools that I wouldn't buy again. And it's really shocking how much money I'm looking at right now. I mean, this is a saw stop, for Christ's sake. Always remember, the websites, the catalogs, the blogs, they're trying to sell you everything they can. Have more self-control than me. Realize You don't need everything, and take your time. Sleep on it. Think, do I really need this? All right. Any questions, comments, criticisms, whatever, leave it in the comments below. I'll be glad to answer each and every one. And until the next video, I'll see you around. Take care.